Welcome to NYLA 2020 On Demand. This session was previously recorded for the NYLA 2020 virtual conference. It is available to you through December 31st, 2020. Please note, once viewed, each on-demand program is eligible for 1 continuing education credit. Links to materials and presenter contact information have been archived in a Google folder and are made available after conference. Support files and documents can be found in session files below the program description. Any questions about the NYLA 2020 virtual conference digital platform can be directed to Christina@nyla.org, or you can call 800-252-6952. Holistic Librarianship is sponsored by LAMS and co-sponsored by RAS and Palizdo. Without further ado, our presenters.
Hello, we're from the Red Hook Public Library, which is not the library in Brooklyn. We're in a small town in Dutchess County, New York, which is in the Hudson Valley. My name is Amy Smith, and I'm the head of programs and youth services. I'll be joined by Don Jardine, the director of our library, Paul Agnew, the assistant director, and Renee Jean, the program coordinator. So what are we talking about? What do we mean by holistic librarianship? Holistic librarianship is how we are referring at Red Hook to a paradigm shift we've chosen to make over the past 18 to 24 months. It represents that we consider Red Hook Public Library to be a greater whole than the sum of its discrete operations. Nothing we do in or for the library stands in isolation. Indeed, what makes public librarianship so exciting for us is when we emphasize the interdependence of operations within the library. Now, like everyone else at Virtual NYLA this year, when we planned this presentation, we didn't know what was ahead. When so much about public librarianship is necessarily changed, it may feel difficult to imagine trying new approaches. Though this pandemic has definitely not given public librarians more time, it has changed so many things that it just might be an opportunity to rethink how your library makes plans. This presentation will explain our planning model and how we got to it. But first, I want to go through some concepts that we found we needed to re-examine as we developed our new approach to planning, development, and implementation. Those concepts are creativity, success, and failure. Reevaluating how each of these concepts were playing out in our decision-making and thinking is what led to the holistic model we're now using and enjoying in Red Hook. I'm going to ask you to just take a moment and think about this question. When's the last time you were creative? What's the image that comes to your mind when you hear that question? Maybe you're an artist, a crafter, a cook. Did you think of something you made? Maybe you thought of something like this photo, a kid drawing with kids or playing pretend. Or maybe you're saying, Amy, I'm just not that creative. Why are these the types of activities that people think of? People equate creativity with being artistic, but is that the only thing it can mean? Our answer is no. So what's creativity? At Red Hook Public Library, creativity is an attitude. It's open-minded problem solving that applies to everything we do. This works as an ethos when you and your work environment are intentionally non-judgmental when it comes to the origins of ideas. The truth is, anyone can be creative, but you have to be open to it. The truth is anyone can be creative, but you have to choose that mindset because otherwise you're locking ideas and innovation behind a wall of judgment, which just restricts your librarianship. And then generating anything new, including finding fresh approaches to recurring issues, becomes onerous. So where do ideas come from? Some ideas come from community partnerships, like with schools or other organizations. Other times, they come from sitting and talking with that lonely elderly patron who spends her days with you. Sometimes it's eavesdropping on teenagers and then casually inquiring about something you overheard. Sometimes ideas come when you're on a walk, doing dishes, or mowing the lawn. Ideas come from your staff members, clerks and pages. They interact with your collections, your patrons, your building all the time. They hear and think about things you might not. Now, remember, I said that we are intentionally non-judgmental about baby ideas, right? Because sometimes ideas come from the news, and your head of programs and youth services might send you some text messages at 8 a.m. Dawn, are you listening to the news? Whoop.
Morning, Amy. No, I'm only on coffee number 1. Blip.
Just now on NPR, I heard a story about how they discovered mammoth traps. Whoop.
Interesting. Blip.
Yes, archaeological evidence of prehistoric humans hunting together, making traps for mammoths. I want to make this into a program. Whoop.
That could be really cool. It could be a whole caveman thing. Blip.
We can make this into a program? Can I build a mammoth trap with some kids at the library? Whoop.
Let's do it at spring break and call it Caveman Camp. Blip.
Ideas can come from anywhere, but you have to believe that or else you won't notice them. Now, did I dig a mammoth trap in the library's parking lot with a passel of eager children? No. But we did cave paintings in the children's library, and we talked about what we could determine about the worldview and lives of prehistoric humans based on the things they drew. Then we thought about what we would draw on our caves so that people in the future might know something about our lives. Okay, let's shift a little bit and talk about how we as public librarians define success. For a program or as an indication of a thriving public library, we often use population statistics, door counts, full rooms at programs, attendance, circulation numbers. So let's look at this photo of a full room. Imagine it's a public library program. It's max capacity, right? So is this a successful program? The audience members are present, but are they engaged? Their body language is pretty closed. A lot of them look fairly bored, and that's okay. But it makes us ask, is the attendance the best measure of success for this program? In fact, it makes us notice that how we define what's successful, whether it's in a program, a new service, or outreach, is determined by the ways we measure success. How does your institution measure success? Take a moment and think of 2 or 3 ways, beyond counting people, that indicate that something is working well for your library. Now think about how you personally measure your successes at work. Once you have those things in mind, the next step is to ask ourselves why. Why are these the things that determine whether or not something is successful? What I'm asking you to consider is how your metrics are aligned with your goals. So here's some pretty popular common metrics for public libraries: attendance, staff turnover, Wi-Fi or website usage, project outcome surveys, donations received, circulation. Metrics let us know if we are making good use of taxpayer dollars. And let's not forget that metrics are usually required for grant reports. But since not all elements of librarianship have the same goals, even within one set of operations, we need to check our metrics. What do I mean? I'm going to give you an example from programming. Popup Library. There's Dawn and I out on the street. Popup Library is something that historically Red Hook Public Library has done every summer, and pre-COVID, we had started to do it year-round. We load our cars up with boxes full of donated books, sometimes there are discards, and we go out to community events. We will go in the summertime to the parking lot outside the local ice cream shop, or to the rec park, or to the First Friday, which is where Dawn and I are here, right in the village, or in the wintertime to the senior basketball game. Our point is to give away books. So the metrics we use for Popup Library are high attendance, our attendance and how many books we give away. This is a program where the effect is broad but shallow. And what do I mean? The goal for Popup Library is promoting literacy, yeah, but actually the real goal is connection with the public where they're at. We're reminding them that the library exists. We're connecting with folks who are not necessarily regular library users and helping them recognize that the library is relevant to their lives and we care about them. So it's broad and shallow because in 2 hours, if Dawn and I, for example, at this one, are going to be interacting with a couple hundred people, we're not going to be talking to them for very long, but we are going to be making connections. So a lot of connections, broad, but each connection is shallow. And the metrics of attendance and numbers of books given away fit that. Now, in contrast, we have the All Abilities Teens programs. These are weekly programs that I run for teenagers with intellectual and or cognitive disabilities. On average, one of these programs will have between 5 and 7 participants plus caregivers. In contrast to the Popup Library, the All Abilities Teens program are deep and narrow. Narrow because the number of folks who are at any one program is small, but deep because even though the goal is also connection, it's a different type of connection. We want to offer opportunities to this underserved group in the community, but in doing so, we are forging relationships. We're giving them the chance to grow comfortable in the library and in the community, and we're giving their families new connections too, so that the purpose and the goal of these programs is also to have lasting connections. So we've established that different programs have different goals, and therefore the metrics we use to determine if we're meeting them are necessarily going to be different. But how do we know when it's time to change or fix something? Even when goal-linked metrics are showing something is successful, we still need to evaluate rather than simply repurpose what we know. What do I mean by evaluate versus repurpose? It's pretty easy to fall into positive feedback loops. Metrics are good, check. Repeat as exists, check. That's repurposing what we know. We look at the metrics, they're good, we say it's working, we'll keep doing it. In contrast, evaluating means that we're looking at the metrics, but we're continuing to ask ourselves questions. The metrics say we're meeting the goals we set. Are those still the goals we need or want? How does this service, this outreach initiative, this construction campaign fit into what's currently going on at the library? Are there additional metrics we want to use to include new or different goals? Again, I'm going to give you some examples from programming because that's what I do. Monster Mash, there we are in all our costumed glory. Monster Mash is a community Halloween party. It was developed about 9 years ago when there were few other events in the community around this time of year. And it gave families with kids something to do to celebrate Halloween that wasn't just trick-or-treating. So for 9 years, the attendance at Monster Mash was good, was very strong. There's a small downward trend the last 2 years, but we're still talking about serving hundreds of people. But as I said, when it started, there were no other events in the town for families. Over time, things were developed. The PTA started a harvest festival in October, and the village began to have a small trick-or-treating alternative festival for young kids on Saturday morning. So the original goal, to offer a family-friendly Halloween party, was being met, but the need for that goal had lessened. What Dawn recognized is that Monster Mash was very labor-intensive, and coming up with and building new activities and games at no cost out of recycled stuff was becoming exhausting. In short, Dawn realized her staff was tired. So a new metric needed to be given higher priority than it had gotten in years past, The staff needed a break from Monster Mash. Another example is SRP. At RHPL, the focus of our SRP is programs. For the past 6 years, we've had summer camps with themed weeks. The content and theme changes year to year. Some years we focus on science. Another year we had kids write, act, and perform their own community theater production. It's different every year. There have also been some shifts over time in the schedule, which age groups have more or fewer sessions and at what times. By and large, our SRP has always been successful based on the metrics we chose. But last year, I realized something and wanted to know if it was significant. The families in which all the adults were working outside the home, who depend on our programs after school and on weekends, they weren't using the summer programs. Now, I'm sure you're all assuming that our programs are amazing and kids are enthralled with our particular style of wacky learning. But let's be honest, a huge draw for the parents is that they are free. So why weren't these families using our free summer programs too? I decided to ask around. The answer was so obvious once I thought about it. It's a matter of scheduling. Our summer programs were very popular, but the schedule meant that a kid needed an adult to be available to pick them up midday. We're a small octagonal building from 1865. We can't have everyone at the same time. There's just no room. But the town rec park has a free half-day summer camp of outdoor activities that goes until 1 p.m. What if, we thought, what if we formed a partnership with the rec park camp so that in combination, families might have a full day of free, fun programs for their kids? One grant proposal later, and we had funding for a school bus to transport kids the 1 mile from rec park to library, and money to give extra hours to high school pages who would help out with the last hour of the day. Well, we didn't get to implement this, thanks COVID, but it will keep for SRP 2021. The point is, we needed to take a fresh look at something that was successful to make sure that our goal to provide enriching summer fun for kids was truly being met. We don't want to only serve the people who show up. We want to go looking for the ones who are missing too. Let's talk for a bit about success's less popular sibling, failure. Now, I've been to a lot of conferences and programming meetings, and typically at least one person at every meeting will proudly announce that they've never had a program that no one showed up for. Now, I'm not saying that's not true, but I will say that makes me wonder if fear of failure is having undue influence on decision making. The biological definition of life involves growth, but growth isn't only expansion. Growth is also complexity and increased detail. The only way you can have growth is change, and without that, your institution isn't alive. So we're asking you to consider that if you have no failure in your organization, maybe you need to reevaluate how you treat failure. Failure can be a dead end. That's the fear of the empty room, right? A nothingness that can't go anywhere. At Red Hook Library, we make a lot of mistakes because we try a lot of new things. For us, failure can't be a dead end because it has to teach us how we want to grow next. When we talk about trial and error, error is required so that you can make another try. But we all live in the real world, so we need to talk about risk too. I know you guys aren't in public librarianship for the money, but the reality is that we're talking about our jobs. And so we want to think about the consequences of mistakes. Let's look at some of those consequences. There's the possibility that you're going to offend someone with your mistake. What we have found to do is to simply be genuine, apologize, listen, learn, and make the change. Now, everybody has limited resources, small budgets. You don't want to put all your staffing, supplies, and political capital into one project. So start small. Have a plan for a bigger change, but choose one place to start before you devote anything greater than some time. Your boss is mad. That would stink. You need to gauge and adapt your decisions to reflect your institution's approach to change and mistakes. You may be eager to forge ahead, but if your institution isn't ready, what can you do? We suggest you look for the space between things before accepting the status quo. Find one thing. See if you can't get approval to start a small shift, maybe some low-hanging fruit. Finally, I want to talk about feeling embarrassed. Remember how I asked you to think about metrics for success? And I asked both how your library measures success and how you do personally? Here's why that matters so much. There's two dynamics at play, the public and the personal. When we're talking about embarrassment, we're talking about the personal. Making a mistake in public is uncomfortable. There's no question about that. But what I'm suggesting is that you ask yourself this: what is my role as a public librarian? For me, the answer to that question is public service. It's not about you or me. It's about how we serve our communities. We have to put aside our personal feelings and opinions all the time as public librarians. Embarrassment about mistakes, fear of failure, these are painful at times, but we need to understand them as irrelevant if we want to develop and grow. So I ask you, how do you respond to failure? How does your library respond to failure? And most importantly, do those responses reflect your goals? Because if you're open to creative problem solving and new ideas, and you're using goal-aligned metrics for success, combined with an acceptance that making mistakes is vitally important to growth, then it's time to think about how to plan effectively using this mindset. We want to know, does your library's planning style reflect its values? Because this is the point at which we at Red Hook Public Library developed holistic librarianship. To better appreciate what changes were involved, Paul Agnew, the Assistant Director, is going to start us on a little historical perspective on RHPL.
Hi there. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how our planning process went from program focus to taking a broader view and thinking about the future of all aspects of the library. About 10 years ago, when our programming was really beginning to take off, we had neither the budget nor the staff to support it. The only employee that was full-time was the director. Programming depended on clerks' interests and willing community volunteers. When we succeeded in getting a second full-time staff member, the assistant director, much of the programming became her responsibility. To let you know a little bit more about that, I will hand you off to our director, Dawn.
Hi. This model overburdened the assistant director, who was also tasked with many operational duties. I know this because it was me. Many exciting programs were indeed offered, but they were often developed with short notice, allowing for very little promotion, and dependent on sometimes unreliable volunteers. A step in the right direction came with the introduction of the program retreat. Contrary to how this might sound, this was not an idyllic cabin in the woods. This was a 4-hour meeting in the library between the director and myself that included copious consumption of cookies. The program retreat did allow us to be more organized and forward-thinking with regards to brainstorming content, planning, and implementation. We held these meetings every 6 months, and we planned for up to a year at a time.
Though the needs of the community were considered, the retreat focused solely on programming. While it did reduce some stress, we still needed dedicated program staff. In 2016, the assistant director became the director, and I was hired as the new assistant director. With the success of several tax initiatives, the library was able to turn existing part-time slots into full-time positions dedicated to programming. This resulted in full-time youth librarian and program coordinator positions, and we were happily ever after. Just kidding. Over time, we learned that 1.5 positions would cover both programming and youth services, which brought us to our current configuration in which there is one full-time head of programs and youth services and one half-time program coordinator, or as we fondly like to refer to them, Amy and Renee. At the next retreat we had, we realized that it had become little more than a program scheduling session. We realized we were duplicating our efforts and wasting time. At the same time, decisions regarding other aspects of the library, such as staffing and collection spending, were being made in relative isolation from each other.
Inspired by projects that involved the coordination of programs, outreach, and collection development, for which Amy and I had been writing grants, Amy suggested replacing the programming retreat with a more holistic type of planning model. Enter the visioning meeting, and back to Amy.
So the central piece of holistic librarianship, as we see it, is the visioning meeting. Here's where our focus on planning in order to amplify the overlapping operations really happens. Now, we're as fond of gimmicks as the next library. And as I said before, our building is an 1865 octagon house. So we decided to use the octagon as our guide. We identified 8 main facets of public librarianship in Red Hook: finances, services, programs, policy, physical plant, outreach, staff, and collections. This is a wide angle view that you might think is more typical for a long-range planning committee from a board of trustees. But we find that taking this perspective is important for staff as well. About every 6 months, we have an administrative staff visioning meeting for the 4 of us. Our agenda looks at each of the facets, yet emphasizes how they affect each other. It's 4 hours and a lot of those cookies we're so fond of. We also tried it as a model with our full staff. Each of the 4 of us met with a subset of the staff for an hour of discussion, using a series of questions linked to the 8 facets. At our next full staff meeting, we all reported back. It was helpful to hear the clerks and pages' ideas, and it showed them that their ideas are valued such that they're more likely to offer them in the future. And in fact, our own board's long-range planning committee has decided to adopt our model as they've begun to update the library's plan. We want to give you a better sense of how the planning works, and we decided the best way to do that would be with 3 examples. Dawn, Renee, and myself are each going to share an example of a dynamic that crosses our visioning meeting octagon. We're presenting things that have happened so that you can see how intentionally planning for such interdependence works out. Dawn.
I'll use staffing as an example of how every decision we make affects all the other aspects of the library. When I came on as director in 2016, 59% of our budget went to staffing. However, as previously mentioned, we were practically killing ourselves trying to keep up with our vigorous programming. The kind of programming that we were engaged in was locally inspired and staff-driven. Originally, programming started out that way because we just couldn't afford to pay outside performers or educators, so we did it ourselves, often with cardboard and other recycled materials. But we discovered along the way that the community really appreciated this type of customized programming. So it grew, and it grew. At some point, I told the board honestly that yes, we could run the library without more staff. That is, we could check things in and check things out and run the desk. But we could not grow our programming anymore. Not the type of programming that we were doing tailored to our community. So a decision was made to invest in people. This decision was not made in isolation. We did anticipate that increasing staff would enhance not only programs, but also services and community relations as well. But we also knew that it meant less money for things like collections. For example, we are one of few area libraries that still don't have Canopy or Hoopla, but we do have people to go to meetings at the middle school, contribute to village events, do STEAM projects at the rec park, and create fun, family-friendly parade floats. Increased staff has also allowed us to pursue more and larger grants. And so it's come back to finances again. In fact, we are finding that as our staff gets out into the community and develops relationships, more money is coming our way via grants and partnerships. This means we can work on more comprehensive, meaningful projects with our partners. Now, please meet Renee, our program coordinator, who will give you an example of how a service led to relationships, programs, and an enhanced collection.
You may be wondering, what is the connection between the books and food on this slide? Well, these are among the things we provide for our senior citizen patrons. We started offering homebound services a few years ago. One of our own library staff experienced being homebound, and her own local library did not offer the service. So we were very motivated to start this service in our own library. By offering patrons in our community delivery of library materials, we got to meet many seniors in Red Hook Commons, the low-income senior housing development in our town. Through conversations with these senior citizens, we learned of their interest in programming, their issue of food insecurity, as well as a need for community connections. We secured grant funding from a local foundation that wanted to address these same issues among seniors. With this funding, we provided movie viewings, arts and crafts, and music concerts at Red Hook Commons, all served with meals. And later on, after content shifted towards more lifelong learning programming, we started our monthly local history lunch series with guest speakers presenting local interest topics over sandwich meals. And since these events were held at our library, we also provided rides for those who did not drive. This is a good example of how a service, homebound, led to outreach to seniors, which drew our attention to the need for financing and programs specifically geared towards low-income senior citizens. It also led to additions to our collection, such as a lending CD player for audiobooks and more large print books. And now back to Amy.
So our last example is about bilingual programs, services, and collections in Spanish and English. This example starts with community relationships. I'd noticed that Spanish-speaking families were coming to the children's library after the morning preschool programs were finished, and I wondered why. So I asked. I learned that the Spanish-speaking parents felt real antipathy from the English-speaking parents, and I decided that we needed to create programs that would break those attitudes down. At the same time, Dawn was participating in district-level meetings with school administration and community stakeholders. They were all talking about the need for an increase in bilingual services in Red Hook. So when I came to Dawn and said, I want to have bilingual story time instead of our usual story time so that everyone is at the same program and the English-speaking families gain some appreciation for their counterparts who speak Spanish as their native language. Dawn was eager and suggested we approach a local grantor who knows and trusts our work. We took that community relationship that prompted an idea for a new program and wrote a grant. With that grant money, we were able to hire staff for a weekly bilingual story time, monthly bilingual family programs, and Spanish as a second language classes for adults. We also added collection development to increase our Spanish language collection and added translation of our policies and services as well. This project started essentially in outreach. It led to programs that required the finances, that paid to hire more staff, who would develop the programs, and finances to buy more materials and pay translators to work on our policies. In turn, offering these things went back to outreach and community relationships even more. As new families were coming into the library, English speakers were learning to appreciate the language and cultures of Latin America, and our library became a little bit closer to serving everyone. If you have any questions, we would be happy to take them.
There is a couple questions. How do you mentioned earlier about the non-judgmental environment for your ideas. How did you go about cultivating that?
Dawn, you want to take this?
Yes, I would say we cultivate it by modeling it. So when we have a staff meeting, everybody gets to speak and all ideas are accepted and valuable to us. And when the staff, which means library assistants, clerks, the custodian and pages, when their ideas are valued and seriously talked about, then they know that it's safe to present ideas.
And I think also you have to make the active choice in how you respond to something. So instead of saying like, well, that's wacky, it would never work. It would be, that's wacky. Let's see what we can make work from that. Or something thereof. It fosters that. But you know, it can also be something that would take a lot of time. It's really going to depend on your coworkers and your work environment.
Great. And do you have any sort of like running idea board or dry erase, or how do you keep track of all of these, just from the slides, all these wonderful ideas and creativity that you have in Red Hook?
Composition notebooks,
Yeah.
emails. You know, I will frequently send out an email that says, "Don't let me forget," and then, you know, bullet point list of odd notions, or truly 8 a.m. text messages. Yeah, you know, one of the things that we have talked about is developing our knowledge management as an institution, and this is one of the areas that we definitely have some room for improvement.
I love that. And on failure, do you have any like rituals or celebrations that you do when somebody makes a big failure or goofs up? Is there something that you can do to bring some levity to that, or suggest that others might do?
Yes, we've had some really big flops, and my attitude is, wow, you know, we haven't had a flop this big since, you know, last week. So you just have to accept that it's going to happen sometimes, and I think that everybody knows that here, and it's okay because we're going to learn from it, and we're certainly not going to learn anything if we don't try new things.
I would say also that levity is pretty much our MO here. And so for us, it's, you know, it's easy to joke around, and because we trust each other and accept each other. And I think that that would be what I would suggest, right? If levity isn't going to fly, if someone is too, you know, is feeling so sensitive about it that that wouldn't be good, then maybe work instead on, you know, ways to develop trust and understanding between coworkers so that they don't feel judged. You can't, you know, help someone who's judging themselves, or you can only help so much, but you could certainly work on, you know, trust and understanding as the institutional culture.
I have to say also that it helps that the library's director is like the most likely person to screw up, and everybody, and I'm not afraid to let people know that I make mistakes too. Wow, I really screwed that up, and it's okay.
Yeah, it comes back to modeling again, which Don
Yeah.
said before.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? Lead by example. Well, thank you so much, Red Hook team. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'm sure everyone else watching did too. This concludes the NYLA 2020 On-Demand Program, Holistic Librarianship. We hope you continue to take advantage of all the on-demand and live programs the NYLA 2020 Annual Virtual Conference has to offer. Thank you for helping us make this the best virtual conference ever.